My new CEO slashed my salary by 30%, even though my biodegradable packaging patent was generating 40% of our company's total profits. But when I started digging into why he would punish the person who literally saved the company from bankruptcy, I uncovered a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving fake consulting companies, corrupt government officials, and a criminal network that reached far beyond anything I could have imagined. What I discovered next would not only threaten my career, but put my life in serious danger. My paycheck was wrong. Standing in the break room at Nexus Dynamics, I stared at the direct deposit notification on my phone. The number was 30% smaller than last month. My heart started racing as I pulled up the company portal to check for errors. But there was no mistake. Richard Steele, our new CEO, had personally signed off on my salary reduction. This was the same patent that saved our company from closing down just 8 months ago. My biodegradable packaging invention was bringing in millions of dollars every quarter. The financial reports showed my work generated 40% of our total profits. Walking back to my desk, I passed Steele's corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see him on the phone, laughing about something. His office was getting a complete makeover with expensive furniture and artwork. Meanwhile, he was cutting the salary of the person who literally kept this company alive. Dean Hawkins looked up from his computer as I sat down. He worked in the engineering department right next to mine. We had been friends since college and started at Nexus Dynamics the same week 5 years ago. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Dean said with a grin. Then he saw my face and got serious. "What happened?" I showed him the pay notification on my phone. Dean's eyes went wide. He knew exactly how much money my patent was making for the company. Everyone in the building knew. "That's impossible," Dean whispered. "Your invention is the only thing keeping us profitable. Without your biodegradable formula, we would have lost half our clients to competitors." Helen Foster from Human Resources walked past our desks. She was carrying a thick folder with my name on it. That made my stomach feel sick. HR only pulled files when something big was happening. At lunch, I decided to do some research. I logged into the company database and pulled up the quarterly earnings reports. The numbers were even better than I thought. My patent wasn't just helping the company survive. It was making us the leader in sustainable packaging. Our biggest client, Greengrocer Corporation, had signed a 5-year contract worth $25 million. The contract specifically mentioned my biodegradable technology as the reason they chose us over other companies. 3 more major deals were pending, all because of my invention. I printed out the financial documents and put them in my personal folder. Something told me I would need proof later. That afternoon, Helen Foster called me into her office. She was sitting behind her desk with a serious expression. The folder with my name was open in front of her. "We need to discuss some changes to your employment terms," Helen said. She pushed a new contract across the desk. "Mr. Steele wants to restructure compensation packages to make the company more efficient." I read through the contract carefully. The salary cut was just the beginning. The new terms also limited my ability to work on future patents. Any inventions I created would automatically belong to the company with no extra payment to me. "This doesn't seem fair," I said, trying to stay calm. "My current contract gives me royalty payments for successful patents. This new agreement takes away all those rights." Helen's face didn't show any emotion. "Everyone is making sacrifices for the good of the company. Mr. Steele believes this approach will help us grow faster." I asked for time to review the contract with a lawyer. Helen said I had until Friday to sign it. That gave me 3 days to figure out what was really happening. After work, I met Dean at a coffee shop downtown. I brought copies of the financial reports and the new contract. Dean studied everything carefully while drinking his coffee. "This is crazy," Dean said. "They're trying to steal your future work while cutting your pay for past success. Something else is going on here." Dean worked closely with the accounting department on project budgets. He had access to internal financial systems that I couldn't see. He promised to do some digging and see what he could find. The next morning, I arrived early to do more research. I wanted to understand exactly how much money my patent was generating. The more I learned, the angrier I became. My biodegradable packaging had revolutionized our entire product line. Customers were paying premium prices because our packaging dissolved harmlessly in landfills within 6 months. Competing companies were still using traditional plastics that took hundreds of years to break down. I found emails between our sales team and major clients. Every single message mentioned my patent as the main reason for choosing Nexus Dynamics. One client said they would cancel their contract if we ever stopped using my biodegradable technology. Around 10 o'clock, Anthony Walsh walked past my desk. He was our chief financial officer and had been working closely with Steele since the new CEO arrived. Anthony used to be friendly and would always say hello. But lately, he acted like I didn't exist. I decided to be bold and approached Anthony's office. Through his open door, I could see him reviewing spreadsheets on his computer. The numbers on his screen looked familiar. They were profit projections based on my patent. "Excuse me, Anthony," I said from his doorway. "Do you have a minute to discuss the new compensation structure?" Anthony looked uncomfortable. He minimized the spreadsheet and turned to face me. "That's really an HR matter. You should talk to Helen about any concerns." But I had already seen enough. The projections on his screen showed my patent generating even more money than I realized. My invention was projected to bring in $60 million over the next 2 years. Walking back to my desk, I felt confused and frustrated. The company was making huge profits from my work, but they wanted to cut my pay and steal my future inventions. Nothing about this situation made sense. Dean appeared at my cubicle with a worried expression. He had been digging through financial records all morning. What he found was going to change everything. Dean's face was pale when he sat down next to my desk. He had a folder full of printed documents that he kept looking at nervously. His hand was shaking as he opened the folder. "I found something really bad," Dean whispered. "But we can't talk about it here. Too many people might hear us." We walked to the parking garage where no one else was around. Dean pulled out the documents and spread them on the hood of his car. The papers showed money transfers that didn't make sense. "Look at these payment records," Dean said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Nexus Dynamics has been sending money to a company called Sterling Consultation Services, but I can't find any record of what services they provide." The payments were huge. Over the past 6 months, our company had sent almost $2 million to this mysterious consulting firm. The timing matched exactly with when Richard Steele became our CEO. I studied the bank routing numbers and company registration details. Something about the name Sterling Consultation Services seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had heard it before. "There's more," Dean continued. "I checked the FDA approval records for your biodegradable patent. The normal approval process takes 18 months, but yours was approved in just 6 weeks. That was strange. When I submitted my patent application, I expected to wait over a year for government approval. The FDA had to test new packaging materials very carefully to make sure they were safe for food contact. But my approval had come through incredibly fast. At the time, I thought we just got lucky with timing. Now I was starting to wonder if something else had happened. Dean showed me more documents. The FDA approval letter was signed by someone named Dr. Patricia Wolf. But when Dean searched for her in the FDA directory, no one by that name worked there. "Either this signature is fake or someone is using a false identity," Dean explained. "FDA approvals don't work this way. There are multiple people who have to sign off on new packaging materials." My stomach started hurting. If my patent approval was fraudulent, it could mean huge legal problems for everyone involved. Companies that used my biodegradable packaging could face lawsuits. Customers might demand refunds for products they thought were environmentally safe. We decided to investigate Sterling Consultation Services more carefully. Dean used his computer skills to search public business records. What we found was shocking. Sterling Consultation Services was registered to an address that didn't exist. The company had no website, no phone number, and no employees listed in any database. But somehow, they were receiving millions of dollars from Nexus Dynamics. I remembered where I had heard the name Sterling before. Grace Sterling worked in our legal department. She had been the one who helped me file my patent paperwork with the FDA. Grace had seemed very helpful during the application process. She knew exactly which forms to fill out and which government officials to contact. At the time, I thought she was just really good at her job. But now I was wondering if Grace Sterling had connections to this fake consulting company. The name couldn't be a coincidence. That afternoon, I decided to do some detective work. I walked over to the legal department and found Grace working at her desk. She was typing an email but quickly closed her computer when she saw me approaching. "Hi, Grace," I said casually. "I wanted to thank you again for helping with my patent application. That fast approval really helped our company." Grace looked nervous. She started organizing papers on her desk without looking at me. "Just doing my job. FDA approvals are pretty routine once you know the right people." Her comment about knowing the right people was interesting. Most lawyers didn't have personal connections with FDA officials. Government agencies were supposed to be independent from private companies. I asked Grace if she had ever heard of Sterling Consultation Services. Her face went completely white. She knocked over her coffee mug, but luckily it was empty. "Why would you ask about that?" Grace said quickly. "I don't know anything about any consulting services." But her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Grace definitely knew about Sterling Consultation Services, and she didn't want to talk about it. Walking back to my desk, I started putting the pieces together. Richard Steele had somehow arranged for my patent to get fast-tracked through the FDA. He was paying millions of dollars to a fake consulting company that might be connected to Grace Sterling. The question was why? If Steele wanted my patent to succeed, why was he now cutting my salary and trying to steal my future inventions? Dean met me after work with even more disturbing information. He had been tracking the money trail deeper and found something that changed everything. "Sterling Consultation Services isn't just getting money from us," Dean explained. "They're also receiving payments from 3 of our biggest competitors." The competing companies were paying Sterling Consultation Services even more money than we were. Over the past year, they had sent almost $10 million to the fake consulting firm. I felt sick thinking about what this might mean. If our competitors were paying the same people who helped approve my patent, there was definitely something illegal happening. Dean pulled out his phone and showed me a recording app. "I think we need to start documenting everything. If this is as big as I think it is, we're going to need proof." The next morning, I arrived at work early to search for more evidence. I logged into the company email system and started looking through old messages between different departments. What I found in Richard Steele's sent folder made my blood run cold. There were emails discussing plans to neutralize the patent situation and minimize future obligations to inventors. One email was particularly chilling. Steele had written to Anthony Walsh about finding ways to reclaim intellectual property assets without triggering legal challenges. They weren't just trying to cut my salary. They were planning to take away my patent completely and claim it belonged to the company from the beginning. I printed out all the emails and hid them in my personal files. Then I used Dean's recording app to document everything I had found. But as I was leaving the office that day, I noticed something that made me realize how much danger I was actually in. Someone had been watching me. Security cameras that never worked before were suddenly pointing directly at my desk. My computer login attempts were being tracked in a system log that didn't exist last week. Even my parking spot was being monitored by a guard who pretended to read newspapers. Richard Steele was getting nervous, and nervous people make dangerous mistakes. I decided to test how far his surveillance went. During lunch break, I walked to the public library downtown and used their computers to research Sterling Consultation Services. What I discovered made my hands shake as I typed. The fake consulting company had been involved in at least 12 other FDA approval scandals over the past 3 years. Companies across the country had paid Sterling Consultation Services to speed up government approvals for products that should never have passed safety tests. One case involved a food packaging company whose containers leaked toxic chemicals into baby formula. Another company had gotten approval for industrial cleaners that caused severe skin burns. In every case, Sterling Consultation Services had somehow convinced FDA officials to skip important safety tests. My biodegradable packaging wasn't dangerous like those other products. But the approval process had definitely been corrupted. If government investigators discovered the fraud, every product using my patent could be recalled from stores. Back at the office, I printed out news articles about the other Sterling Consultation Services scandals. I hid the papers inside a technical manual that no one ever bothered to read. Dean appeared at my desk with a worried expression. He had been investigating the financial records deeper and found something that changed everything we thought we knew. "The money isn't flowing the way we thought," Dean whispered. "Sterling Consultation Services isn't keeping the payments from Nexus Dynamics and our competitors. They're sending everything to another company." Dean showed me bank transfer records he had somehow accessed. Sterling Consultation Services was just a middle company. All the money was being transferred to something called Apex Regulatory Solutions. But Apex Regulatory Solutions wasn't a real consulting firm either. The company was registered to Richard Steele's home address in the expensive part of town. My heart started racing. Our CEO wasn't just stealing money from our company. He was running a massive bribery scheme that involved multiple companies and government officials. The scariest part was realizing how much money was involved. Over the past 3 years, Steele had collected almost $50 million from companies wanting to skip FDA safety tests. I felt sick thinking about all the dangerous products that might be in stores because of Steele's scheme. Parents were buying baby food in containers that might leak chemicals. Hospitals were using cleaning products that could hurt patients. Dean and I decided we needed to gather more evidence before going to the authorities. We couldn't just accuse the CEO of a major corporation without solid proof. That afternoon, I requested a meeting with Steele to discuss my new employment contract. His assistant scheduled me for 5 o'clock, after most employees had gone home. Walking into Steele's office felt like entering a lion's den. His expensive furniture and artwork reminded me that he had been stealing money for years while cutting my salary. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said, sitting across from his massive desk. "But I have some questions about how the company makes decisions." Steele leaned back in his leather chair and smiled, but his eyes stayed cold and calculating. "What kind of questions?" he asked. I pulled out my phone and started the recording app that Dean had helped me install. The phone was sitting on the desk between us, but Steele didn't seem to notice. "I'm curious about our relationships with regulatory agencies," I said carefully. "My patent approval happened very quickly. I want to understand how that process works." Steele's smile faded slightly. He studied my face like he was trying to figure out how much I knew. "The FDA approval process can vary depending on many factors," he said slowly. "Sometimes applications move faster when companies have experienced legal teams." I decided to push harder. "Grace Sterling seems very connected with government officials. Has she worked with FDA approvals before?" Now Steele looked definitely uncomfortable. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the parking lot. "Grace is very talented at her job," he said without turning around. "But I think you're asking the wrong questions." Steele turned back to face me. His friendly mask was completely gone now. I could see the ruthless businessman underneath. "Your patent has been very successful," Steele continued. "But success can be fragile. Regulations change. Approvals can be revoked. Companies that don't adapt quickly can lose everything." The threat was clear. If I kept investigating, he would find a way to destroy my patent and my career. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more question that would tell me exactly how dangerous Steele really was. "What happens to inventors whose patents get revoked?" I asked. "Do they face legal problems?" Steele walked back to his desk and sat down. He stared at me for a long moment before answering. "Inventors who violate FDA regulations can face serious consequences," he said quietly. "Criminal charges, prison time, complete destruction of their professional reputation." I felt a chill run down my spine. Steele wasn't just threatening to take away my patent. He was threatening to frame me for the very crimes he had committed. Standing up to leave, I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'll think about everything you've said." "You do that," Steele replied. "And remember that some knowledge can be very dangerous for people who don't know how to handle it properly." Walking out of his office, I realized that Dean and I were no longer just investigating corporate fraud. We were in a battle with someone who would destroy anyone who threatened his criminal empire. But what I discovered the next morning would prove that Steele had already started his attack against us. Dean's desk was empty. His computer was gone, his personal pictures were missing, and a security guard was standing nearby, watching everyone who walked past. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what had happened overnight. Helen Foster appeared beside me with a grim expression. She was carrying another one of those thick folders that meant someone's career was about to end. "Dean Hawkins is no longer employed with Nexus Dynamics," Helen announced loud enough for nearby workers to hear. "He violated several company policies regarding access to confidential information." My hands started shaking. Dean had been my closest ally in investigating Steele's criminal activities. Without his computer skills and financial access, I would have a much harder time gathering evidence. But worse than losing Dean was wondering what Steele might do to him. If our CEO was willing to bribe government officials and threaten employees, he might be capable of even more serious crimes. I tried calling Dean's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text message asking if he was okay, but no response came back. Walking to my desk, I noticed that my computer access had been changed too. I could no longer view financial records or company emails outside my own department. Someone had quietly reduced my system permissions overnight. Grace Sterling walked past my cubicle carrying a box of legal documents. She was moving quickly and wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. I decided to follow her to see where she was going. Grace took the elevator to the executive floor where only senior management was allowed. Through the glass walls, I could see her entering Richard Steele's office with her box of papers. They were destroying evidence. All the documents that could prove Steele's bribery scheme were being gathered up and hidden away. I realized I needed to act fast before they eliminated every trace of their criminal activities. Using my remaining computer access, I started downloading copies of any documents I could still reach. My email inbox contained several messages between different departments that mentioned my patent. I forwarded all of them to my personal email account before anyone could delete them. The accounting system still allowed me to view some budget reports. I printed out anything that showed payments to Sterling Consultation Services or other suspicious expenses. Around noon, I received a meeting request from Helen Foster. She wanted to see me in her office immediately. My heart started racing as I walked to the HR department. Helen's office felt like a courtroom where I was about to be sentenced. She had multiple folders spread across her desk, and her expression was completely serious. "We need to discuss some concerns about your recent behavior," Helen began. "Several employees have reported that you've been asking inappropriate questions about company finances and regulatory matters." I knew this was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. Steele was using the HR department to build a case against me. "I've only been trying to understand how my patent fits into the company's overall strategy," I replied carefully. Helen opened one of her folders and pulled out printed emails. They were messages I'd sent to Dean about our investigation. Someone had been monitoring my communications. "These emails suggest you've been attempting to access confidential information without authorization," Helen continued. "Corporate espionage is a serious crime that can result in federal charges." The accusation was ridiculous, but I realized how dangerous my situation had become. Steele was using the same strategy he had threatened in his office. He was going to frame me for investigating the crimes he had committed. "I would like to have a lawyer present before answering any more questions," I said. Helen's expression didn't change. "That's your right. But I should mention that we've also received some disturbing information about your patent application process." My blood ran cold. Helen pulled out another document that looked like an official government report. "The FDA has informed us that there may have been irregularities in your patent approval," Helen explained. "They're opening an investigation into possible fraud or bribery involving your application." This was exactly what Steele had threatened. He was using his connections to make it look like I had bribed government officials to get my patent approved. "That's impossible," I said. "I followed all the proper procedures when applying for FDA approval. According to this report, you may have used unauthorized intermediaries to influence the approval process," Helen replied. "The FBI is interested in speaking with you about your relationship with Sterling Consultation Services." I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Steele had somehow convinced federal investigators that I was the one running the bribery scheme. But then I remembered something important. I had been recording conversations and gathering documents for weeks. Even though Dean was gone, I still had evidence that could prove my innocence. "I want to cooperate fully with any investigation," I told Helen. "In fact, I have information that might help the FBI understand what really happened." Helen looked surprised. She had expected me to panic or try to deny everything. "What kind of information?" she asked. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app. "I have documented evidence of conversations with senior management about regulatory approvals and financial irregularities." Helen's face went pale. She realized that I might have recorded conversations with Richard Steele himself. "I think this meeting should end now," Helen said quickly. "You should speak with a lawyer before providing any information to investigators." Walking back to my desk, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. Steele had made his move by trying to frame me for his crimes, but he had underestimated how much evidence I had gathered. That evening, I met with a lawyer who specialized in corporate whistleblower cases. I brought all the documents I had collected and played the recording of my conversation with Steele. The lawyer listened carefully and took detailed notes. When I finished explaining everything, she had a serious expression on her face. "This is one of the largest corporate fraud cases I've ever seen," she said. "But you're in serious danger. If Steele is willing to frame you for federal crimes, he might try more direct methods to stop you." I knew she was right, but I also knew that I couldn't let Steele destroy innocent people's lives with his dangerous approval scheme. The next morning, I would have to make the most important decision of my career. Federal agents were surrounding the Nexus Dynamics building when I arrived at work. Black cars filled the parking lot, and people in dark suits were carrying boxes of evidence out the front entrance. My heart pounded as I realized the FBI had finally started their investigation. But something felt wrong about the timing. I had planned to contact the authorities myself after meeting with my lawyer. Someone else had beaten me to it. Agent Maria Santos approached me in the parking lot. She was tall with short brown hair and carried herself like someone used to being in charge. "Are you the inventor of the biodegradable packaging patent?" she asked, showing me her FBI badge. I nodded, wondering how much trouble I was about to be in. "We need to talk," Agent Santos said. "But not here. Too many people are watching." She drove me to a coffee shop across town where we could speak privately. Agent Santos ordered 2 coffees and sat across from me in a corner booth. "Someone contacted our office yesterday, claiming you were involved in bribing FDA officials," she began. "But the person who called us made some interesting mistakes in their story." My stomach relaxed slightly. The FBI wasn't here to arrest me. "What kind of mistakes?" I asked. Agent Santos pulled out a notebook and flipped through several pages. "The caller claimed you personally met with FDA officials in Washington, D.C. But our records show you've never traveled outside your home state during the patent approval process." Richard Steele had tried to frame me, but he hadn't done his homework carefully enough. "The caller also claimed you made payments to Sterling Consultation Services," Agent Santos continued. "But bank records show all payments came from Nexus Dynamics corporate accounts that you don't have access to." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The FBI had already figured out that Steele was lying about my involvement. "We've been investigating Sterling Consultation Services for 6 months, Agent Santos explained. "Your patent was just one of many suspicious approvals connected to their organization." She showed me photographs of FDA officials who had been taking bribes. Dr. Patricia Wolf, whose signature was on my patent approval, was actually a retired FDA employee who had been forging documents for money. The real breakthrough came when someone started recording conversations with Richard Steele, Agent Santos said. "Do you know anything about that?" I pulled out my phone and played the recording of my meeting with Steele. Agent Santos listened carefully, taking notes as Steele's voice described how regulations could be changed and approvals could be revoked. "This is exactly what we needed," she said when the recording finished. Steele essentially confessed to running the entire bribery scheme. But Agent Santos had more surprising news. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence that went far beyond simple patent fraud. Sterling Consultation Services was connected to a network of corrupt officials in multiple government agencies, she explained. EPA approvals, USDA certifications, even Department of Transportation permits were being bought and sold. The criminal network had been operating for almost 5 years. Dozens of companies had paid millions of dollars to skip safety tests and regulatory requirements. "Your biodegradable patent was actually one of the safer products involved," Agent Santos said. "Most of the other companies were manufacturing genuinely dangerous materials." I thought about Dean and wondered if he was safe. Agent Santos said the FBI had been protecting him since he first contacted their office 2 weeks ago. "Dean Hawkins has been working as an informant for our investigation," she revealed. His firing from Nexus Dynamics was actually planned to make it look like he was no longer a threat. Dean had been feeding information to the FBI while pretending to be unemployed. His computer skills had helped agents track money transfers and document the entire criminal network. "We needed someone inside the company to gather evidence," Agent Santos explained. Dean volunteered to help after we showed him how many people could be hurt by contaminated products. The FBI raid on Nexus Dynamics was just the beginning. Agents were simultaneously searching offices at 12 other companies involved in the bribery scheme. Richard Steele is being arrested right now, Agent Santos said, checking her phone for updates, along with 15 other corporate executives and 8 government officials. I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Steele would finally face consequences for his crimes. But Agent Santos had one more surprise that changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. Grace Sterling wasn't working for Richard Steele, she said. She's been an undercover FBI agent for the past 2 years. My jaw dropped. Grace had been investigating the criminal network from inside Nexus Dynamics long before I started gathering evidence. Grace was the one who made sure your patent approval looked suspicious enough to attract our attention, Agent Santos explained. She deliberately used forged signatures and fake consulting companies to create a paper trail we could follow. Grace had been protecting me while building a case against Steele. Her nervous behavior and reluctance to talk about Sterling Consultation Services had been an act to maintain her cover. The coffee mug incident in her office was a signal to let us know you were getting close to the truth, Agent Santos said with a smile. Grace thought you might be ready to become a cooperating witness. Everything made sense now. Grace had guided my patent through the corrupt approval process specifically to expose the criminal network. My invention had been used as bait to catch much bigger criminals. What happens to my patent now? I asked. Agent Santos explained that the FBI would recommend legitimate FDA review of my biodegradable packaging. The technology itself was genuine and innovative, even though the approval process had been corrupted. Based on independent testing, your invention will probably be approved through normal channels, she said. The only difference is that it will take longer and cost more money. I was willing to wait for legitimate approval. Knowing that my patent could help the environment without supporting criminal activities made the delay worthwhile. Agent Santos drove me back to Nexus Dynamics, where employees were gathering in the parking lot watching federal agents carry evidence to their vehicles. What will happen to the company? I asked. That depends on how much the new management cooperates with our investigation, Agent Santos replied. Companies that help us prosecute criminals usually survive these situations. Walking toward the building, I saw Dean standing near the main entrance. He was talking to other FBI agents and looked much more relaxed than he had in weeks. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me inside. Grace Sterling was sitting at her desk working on legal documents when I walked into the office. But now I knew she was actually FBI agent Grace Sterling, and everything about her made perfect sense. Her quick access to FDA contacts, her knowledge of regulatory procedures, and her nervousness around me had all been part of her undercover assignment. I guess I owe you an explanation, Grace said with a real smile for the first time since I'd known her. Dean joined us in the legal department conference room, where Grace could speak freely about her investigation. He looked much happier knowing that federal agents had been protecting him throughout the dangerous operation. The FBI has been tracking corruption in regulatory agencies for 3 years, Grace explained. Richard Steele's network was the largest bribery scheme we'd ever discovered. She pulled out files that showed the true scope of the criminal organization. Sterling Consultation Services had helped over 60 companies skip safety tests for products ranging from children's toys to medical devices. Your biodegradable patent gave us the perfect opportunity to infiltrate Steele's operation, Grace continued. We needed a legitimate inventor whose work could attract attention from corrupt officials. The FBI had been watching Nexus Dynamics since before Steele became CEO. They knew he would target any successful patents that could generate large profits. When Steele cut your salary, we realized he was planning to steal your patent completely, Grace said. That gave us evidence of criminal intent that we could use in court. Dean had played a crucial role by documenting financial transactions and internal communications. His computer access had provided the FBI with real-time information about Steele's activities. The hardest part was protecting you without revealing our investigation, Grace admitted. Steele was getting suspicious about why his plans weren't working. Several times, Grace had deliberately created bureaucratic delays to prevent Steele from finalizing his theft of my patent. She had also been feeding him false information about FBI interest in his activities. When you started your own investigation, we had to decide whether to bring you into our operation, Grace explained. Your recording of Steele's threats gave us the final evidence we needed. The FBI had arrested Richard Steele that morning along with 12 other Nexus Dynamics employees who had participated in the bribery scheme. Anthony Walsh, our CFO, had been laundering money through fake consulting companies for over 2 years. What happens to everyone who worked here but wasn't involved in the crimes? I asked. Grace smiled and pulled out another set of documents. The board of directors voted this morning to promote Dr. Jennifer Kim to CEO. She's been running the engineering department and had no knowledge of Steele's activities. Dr. Kim was someone I respected tremendously. She had always supported my research and encouraged innovation throughout the company. Dr. Kim wants to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer, Grace continued, along with full ownership rights to your biodegradable patent and a significant salary increase. My heart started racing with excitement. After months of fighting to protect my invention, I was being offered the chance to lead technology development for the entire company. Dean received an offer to become Director of Financial Analysis, with responsibilities for preventing future fraud and ensuring ethical business practices. The company will also be paying substantial damages to compensate for the salary cuts and stress you experienced during Steele's criminal activities, Grace explained. But the most satisfying news was yet to come. The Department of Justice is recommending that Richard Steele receive a 20-year prison sentence, Grace said, along with complete forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal activities. Steele would lose his expensive house, his luxury cars, and millions of dollars in stolen money. Everything would be sold to compensate victims of his fraud scheme. The FDA has also agreed to fast-track legitimate approval of your biodegradable patent, Grace continued. Independent testing confirms that your invention is both safe and revolutionary for environmental protection. Major companies were already expressing interest in licensing my technology for their packaging needs. The legitimate approval process would actually increase demand because customers could trust that proper safety tests had been completed. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office as Chief Technology Officer watching news coverage of Richard Steele's sentencing.